May 7th, 2026, and welcome to episode 129 of the Driving Forward podcast. Whether you're joining us live or listening on one of our 18 platforms, including Reefs Across America Radio, where we broadcast every Tuesday evening from 4 to 5 p.m. Central Time, we appreciate your support. If I happen to lisp or talk a little weird, I got some braces added in Monday. I'm on day 4. I'm still learning how to talk with all this metal in my mouth. So apologies on that. I may over enunciate just to ensure everybody understands me. But I can feel it right now trying to talk in the podcast voice. And it's going to be a thing. So next week, we have Jeff Resch from Hyperscale on. We're going to talk about AI, operational efficiency, kind of anything and everything from a tech stack. Actually, I just found out Robert Bain's going to join us too. And this is a discussion that Jeff and I have had for the last couple months, which is just flat out the technology gap, specifically on the asset-based side of this industry. It's something we identified early on this year. I mean, I think we've all known it exists, but I don't think we really had an idea of how wide that gap is. And we sort of notched this up at TMC and at Matt's and at many shows throughout the year. We've been just noticing how wide the technology gap is. So looking forward to the discussion with Jeff. The following week, we have Chris Sonic on from 10 Logistics, followed by Todd Waldron with whoever Todd Waldron's going to be with. He has not announced yet. And then Melanie Samard with Isaac Instruments. That'll be a good one, too. And if you don't know Melanie, you're going to want to tune in on this one. She has a heck of a story about her whole career in transportation. She started as a freight broker, went to a driver role, and then is now a VP at Isaac Instruments, and just has a wonderful overall story. Lots and lots of stories from her. I love talking with Melanie. So upcoming events, this is where we're at over the next couple months. So Susan Mayo was just at the Big Rigs for Little Kids golf tournament. There were sheep. So we've got pictures of sheep out there, but that's a Susan thing. Missy and Susan are both at ATA mid-year. Missy Hetland and Susan Mayo. Bain's going to be at the Midwest European Truckers event. I'll be at MTA Spring Golf Outing. Myself and Mike Solars will be at Samsara Beyond, and we go on from there. I do have a speaking engagement at the TCA Refrigerated meeting. Then at the end of July, what's not showing is the Minnesota Trucking Association annual conference. So we'll be there as well. Lots going on. We were just talking about that in the green room. So today's conversation is about freight fraud, but not the old version of freight fraud. Not just a trailer or theft, not just a trailer disappearing from the yard, not just bad actors grabbing loads and disappearing, not just fake carriers slipping through the cracks. This version starts potentially earlier in that story. It starts with a clicked email, a compromised login, a spoofed domain, a carrier that looks legitimate, or dispatchers under pressure. A delivery change that may sound normal, a process that has worked for years, and it all is fine until the wrong person learns how to exploit it. Those numbers are no longer background noise. CargoNet reported that estimated cargo theft losses across the U.S. and Canada surged to nearly $725 million in 2025. That's up 60% from the year before, with the average theft value climbing to $273,000, almost $274,000 actually. That tells us the criminals are not just stealing anymore. They're stealing smarter, targeting higher value freight, and using systems, speed, and the trust that this industry runs on, and they're using that against us. The FBI has now warned about cyber-enabled strategic cargo theft. That's a long term, where criminals impersonate legitimate brokers and carriers. They use spoofed emails, fake URLs, compromised accounts, load board deception, and social engineering to redirect freight before anyone realizes they are inside a fraud event. So, because cybersecurity is no longer something that lives in a server room, it lives in dispatch, it lives in carrier onboarding, it lives in accounting, it lives in the driver's phone call, and it lives in every handoff from tender to pickup to delivery. So today we have two people who are right in the middle of that fight. Ben Wilkens, the director of cybersecurity at National Motor Freight Traffic Association, which I wanted to say that out loud the whole time, the NMFTA. So Ben's going to bring that cybersecurity lens, and he has a great background in transportation logistics, started as a driver as well. Ben's been on before. Joe Orr, the NMFTA's Chief Operations and Technical Officer, he brings a great operational presence and a lot of background in technology. So we're also going to dig into freightfraudhub.com, which was built to help stop freight fraud before it starts by improving how the industry operates, verifies, and protects freight. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. That was a little longer than usual, and I was really struggling to make sure the words came out of my mouth right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been I don't remember the last time you guys are on, but it's probably been close to a year or so, if I'm thinking right. So, yeah. But great to have you all on. So, what is new in the world of cybercrime and freight fraud?
Well, Nate, I think you summed up kind of the picture of the landscape pretty well, and the numbers speak for themselves as far as where we're at as an industry, the scope and scale of this issue. I think one of the things to call out is the prevalence of how this is starting with social engineering. That's really the root of the majority of these incidents, and social engineering has evolved dramatically over the last couple of years with the advent of generative AI and some of the sophisticated tools for, spoofing even voice calls. And, we're verging on seeing spoof video calls in the wild for social engineering purposes. Right. So, that's really elevated the social engineers game and made them much more dangerous, much more effective. And I think that's a major contributing factor to why we've seen the success rate of these kinds of attacks go up. Because we as an industry, like you said, you nailed it right on the head, we run on trust in transportation. We have established relationships. We're not necessarily using extensive vetting for a known individual that we always do business with. So if they're compromised, your trading partner's compromised through a social engineering attack, and a bad actor is communicating with you using their actual email addresses from their platform, we really haven't caught up with being suspicious of that kind of traffic or even thinking of that as a threat vector. So I think that's really, if I was to pick one thing that stands out to me that's building this trend to where we're at currently, that would be it, is the evolution of social engineering.
Joe? And I'll add to that. One of the other things I think, you mentioned the stats, and that's only the ones that are reported. There's so many that aren't reported. And you mentioned, we hadn't been on for a while, and I guarantee the numbers since we've been on have likely doubled. Sure. And so, one of the things is, you're right, this industry is built on trust. But it's also an industry that just recently started to embrace technology. And so this technology trust that these companies have all of a sudden is shaken, because the driver's like, wait a minute, you told me this is how you're going to communicate with me. We used to do it the old fashioned way on phone, and now we're doing digital, and I'm confused. I think the other big thing is that's changed, and it's not from what's causing it, but I was telling Ben, the last few weeks with you mentioned Freight Fraud Prevention Hub. We've talked to a lot of people and a lot of carriers, a lot of brokers, and I don't think I've ever seen like the level of desperation for help that I've seen on these calls. We had a few people this week that, they weren't the huge guys, right?
Right.
If one shipment gets taken, they're out of business. And these guys were both, a couple of these folks were about ready to close shop. They're like, I don't know how to beat it. And the one guy's almost in tears. And so it really gets to you because it's like, how can we fight this? How can we beat this? So I think the scale at which things are happening, they used to just go after big carriers, certain loads, much more organized. AI is not, although AI is great, it's hurt this. And that they're able to hit the masses. So folks that didn't think they would be vulnerable to freight fraud all of a sudden are vulnerable to freight fraud.
Well, it's happening in such a wide. Well, number one, we've quantified it a lot better. So why you say the numbers aren't all being reported, I think in some cases in many cases there was scenarios in the past that weren't being reported that are now being reported. So I think people are understanding that this is an issue, so much so that it goes through the administration. So it certainly has spread out, though. It's a topic at every summit, conference, etc. It's a deep conversation. I know I'm speaking about it at the Minnesota Trucking Association with Dale Prax. It's a constant discussion about how you defend yourself and process and following process and ensuring that you stay in your documented processes if you have them is imperative. It still doesn't close all gaps because, to Ben's point, the bad actors are figuring out how to do wild and crazy things. And AI has made a pain of it. 100% agree on that. Not only, from a freight fraud perspective, but from a cybercrime perspective, it's made them be able to go so fast. So, right. So what sort of advice do you give those small carriers that are, wondering whether or not they should even be in the game anymore because of this sort of issue?
I'll start, Ben, and then pass
Sure.
off to you.
Yeah.
One of the things that we've talked about, a lot of these folks don't understand the tools that are there. How to vet carriers, how to vet brokers, how to make sure what they're doing is legit. So the first thing is just an education. And that's one of the things we're trying to do is, okay, here's some tools, here's some ways, here's a guidebook, here's some processes to make sure you're vetting who you're doing business with. And I think the other thing we always say is if it's too good to be true, it most likely is. And then finally pick up the phone, even if it's somebody you've been doing business with, if all of a sudden something changes, something's out of the ordinary, pick up the phone. And be careful who you make those relationships with. I think, that's, again, gets back to, it's a trusting industry, which is great. But now, we're almost being invaded by folks that we can't trust. So you hate to say it, but we have to be trust but verify. Ben?
Yeah, and I think I would add to that. You mentioned the education piece around carrier vetting or partner vetting. And that's critical. There's another piece of education and awareness training that's really critical, which is the social engineering awareness training. And one of those kind of low-hanging fruit is training, right? It's typically a lower cost. It's an extraordinarily high impact step that you can take to raise awareness among your teams, how to spot these kinds of deviations from your process and identify them as a potential risk, how to pick up on a false sense of urgency that's maybe injected into a conversation where they're being pressured to make a decision very quickly. That should always be a red flag. Now, we operate at a high speed, changes have to happen and quickly in transportation, but anything unusual that's also pressurized or is using a sense of authority or false sense of authority to get someone to do something, those are all the kinds of red flags that you want to teach your team to recognize. And then the other advice that we always give is start with the basic cyber hygiene, those low-hanging fruit kind of high impact steps. Again, free things like choosing secure passwords, not reusing passwords, not sharing passwords among a team. Having a strong offboarding process when an employee leaves the company, making sure that their access is revoked in a timely manner. Old access to a load board is an easy way in for a bad actor. That access can be stolen, it can be sold. Multi-factor authentication. Those are steps that can be taken that make your own attack surface that much more hardened against these kinds of threats. And then coupled with the awareness training, your organization goes from very low-hanging fruit to a much higher level of security and resistance.
So all of those points are, I call it kind of cyber 101, right? You got to have base level defense and make yourself look more difficult to work with. So the bad actors will move on to someone else, unfortunately, but then that next person gets targeted. So unfortunately, we're pointing people, the better defenses you have, the more likely they're going to move on to one of your colleagues. So that being said, statistically, it's somewhere between 75 and 90 some odd percent of all events typically happen due to human error. Especially on the cyber side. On the freight fraud side, it's probably closer to 100%. So the reality of it is that's a big swing in percentage, but even at 75%, most of that can be shored up by multi-factor authentication and training. So I'm 100% behind that. Can you, Ben, can you walk us through the life of a cyber enabled fraud event? So what I mean by cyber enabled is digitally, and there we go, had a tough time saying that, digitally. What happens after somebody, does something wrong and they get cyber compromised, and that eventually leads to a freight fraud incident? Can you kind of walk us through the steps of that event?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if we take the social engineering leading to an email compromise as an example, it's a pretty common attack vector. So the original target is going to be, someone opening an email, clicking a link, or falling for one of these, the copy paste kind of style attack where they're given a command by a fake help desk that they're supposed to paste in and run. All of this just leads to credential theft and access to their email account. There could be other accounts in the organization as well, but in the instance of, in the lens of cargo crime, the email is important, right? Because that's often how we communicate. That's how loads are arranged. That's how changes are transferred back and forth between, trading partners. And so once there's an availability of this email account, number one, you can contact all of the trading partners as a trusted entity. Number two, you can monitor that traffic, and you can just kind of sit back and watch and wait for these shipments that are going to be easy to fence, easy to resell on the black market. And something that's got a last minute change in it, is going to be a kind of a juicy target. If it's a high value, easy to fence target, then you can coordinate with, with the bad actor coordinates with their own team. They'll send in their driver with the correct authentic load information. They've got access to it. They can get access to those digital bills of lading, the pickup numbers, all of the information that's required to make a legitimate pickup. But they may change the appointment time with the shipper, again, from a trusted source, from a trading partner's email domain, a legitimate email. It's going to pass all the security checks at a technical level. And so, once that pickup is made, they're going to either use their own malicious driver to take it to their facility, or they may use a legitimate driver who picks up the load, and then they'll redirect the shipment to their own facility, where the driver's not going to have any idea that something's changed. They just get a redirect request. That does happen, legitimate reasons. We see that all the time in the industry. And then at that point, the load is brought to the bad actor's warehouse, broken down, repackaged, put on different trucks, and it disappears into the black market.
I appreciate that whole viewpoint on that. There's a lot of points where you can defend against this, but the most important one is in the beginning. So, Joe, when the bad actors use a company identity, so if they use a real MC number or a real looking contract or real emails, how do you feel that changes the game for other brokers, carriers, and shippers? I mean, how has that impacted everyone?
I think the problem is that at this point there's no trust. You've got to step back and you've got to think about, okay, what processes. You got to vet everybody, even though somebody you've done business with, because it is so easy to do email compromise. It is so easy to spoof phone numbers. It's easy to do GPS jamming. So really what you have to do is, you got to continue to re-verify that the folks you're doing business with is who you think. Also, look at what's normal. Like if you've done business with the same folks and they communicate the same way at the same time, look at that. If all of a sudden something happens that's a bit out of the ordinary, that's something you want to raise your antennas up to and say, okay, wait a minute, this just doesn't make sense. This is abnormal for this person I've had a relationship with. So look for a change in behavior, because the person behind the keyboard may have changed, and that's when you pick up the phone and call. I think the other thing to add to it is we were at a conference and I said, how many people in freight fraud are there, and how many people in cyber are there? Then I said, when a freight fraud event happens, do you include cyber? And no, I think one or two out of 50 hands raised. And so I think the other thing is, figure out, okay, I've got this event. Well, how did they get in? Do your due diligence, pull in the cyber team and say, hey, this person got a hold of some information. We need to treat this like a cyber event. There needs to be better cooperation between the folks investigating the freight fraud and the cyber teams, I think, across the board.
We've been singing that tune for years. So it absolutely is the case. They're very similar. It's the only time where a freight fraud incident is not tied to cyber is when it's a random hijacking, which I think are fewer and fewer because you do have some old school things where they're targeting a particular shipper or whatnot. But I don't think there's that much happening that way. And those numbers potentially have come down or have stayed stagnant. So because you have the ability of having a non-invasive, no chance for a physical altercation, by taking the technology approach. Joe, you brought up GPS jammers, and that was something, we've known about that in Mexico for a long time, but I've had some discussions with carriers recently where they've never even heard of the GPS jamming and how that functions. Can one of the two of you talk through what the bad actors use GPS jammers for?
Yeah, I'll start, and Ben, I'll hand off to you. There's two types. There's the GPS jamming, GPS spoofing. And I remember, it's been more than 10 years ago. You could go into a lot of truck stops and buy GPS jammers.
Right.
Why? Because the driver didn't want to be tracked from a telematics perspective, or at that point it wasn't ELD, but it was electronic log perspective. So they would do things like GPS jamming. They also didn't want the dispatcher to know where they were at sometimes, and so that's one flavor of it. And then the thing that we're seeing now, and you can buy them, pretty much anywhere, is GPS spoofers. And what it does is allow you to manipulate the GPS, which is pretty scary, easy to do with some of these devices. We're looking at devices the other day that are just on the market at, like, for example, Amazon, and there's a lot of them. It does not take a lot of technical capability to do. It's easy to do. So, what the bad actor can do is basically spoof the GPS. So if you're a dispatcher and you're watching a truck, you're thinking, okay, it's en route, it's going where it should be. We saw that with the Sammy Tequila heist, right? Everybody thought, oh yeah, this truck is going up and down the East Coast. It's all the way where it should be. All of a sudden, it showed up in California. It's like, well, how did that happen? Well, what they did was spoof the GPS, and so the GPS has, since it is easy to manipulate, that's one of the big challenges. Is what data can you trust? What data can't be manipulated? And then I think as an industry, we really got to take a look at, okay, how do we prevent this from happening? And that's one of the things we're looking at. Ben?
Yeah, and I think we're also starting to see, and I don't want to go AI dash everything here, but we are starting to see some tools where with like ELD manipulation, we start to see that as it's a machine learning powered or AI powered manipulation of both the hours of service and the location history in order to match the manipulated hours of service. And so if you think about maybe doing an audit to go back and look and see, where did this load go? Was it where it was supposed to be? If it wasn't caught in real time, that's going to confuse the audit trail if you see manipulation there and you've got falsified information. And that's getting easier and easier to do. And there are organizations that are offering that as a service now out there. So it's, everything software as a service. We've got ransomware as a service. Now we have ELD tampering as a service.
That's interesting. It wasn't that long ago I was talking with somebody who said that the ELDs were not being tampered with, and I kind of shook my head and said, I don't know what you're talking about, but we deal with that all the time, or at least encounter it all the time. So the other side is the tracker manipulation. A lot of companies that we work with were experiencing that, and that was high in volume. We see it less now, but we've been training them on these things. We've also looked at abnormalities in data. So what we found is when the spoofers come forward, your expected data and the lack of it in some cases, or the preciseness of the spoofer can potentially be a identifier, or the randomness of. I mean, it's different than the other data, but it doesn't. It's a signal, I guess, is the best way of putting it. So we're coming up on our break here in a minute, but why don't we touch this one and we'll come back in. We'll talk about freightfraudhub.com or Freight Fraud Prevention Hub. But criminals are getting more technical. We've talked a lot about AI. I mean, we're using AI in a lot of paths, meaning the operators, the good guys. We're trying to become faster, better, stronger. What the criminals are becoming more technical. But they're also understanding the industry even more because we've started defending against it. So do you guys want to talk on that for a few minutes before we go to break?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that, as it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Where you have, as awareness of this issue rises, and we're talking about it more, and we're talking about how to defend against it more. There's also an awareness on the threat actor side or the bad actor side of how the industry is responding, how the industry is adapting, what kinds of tools we're all using to defend against this. And we've seen this in the cybercrime world since cybercrime was a thing, where the new technology comes out, the bad actors figure out a way to use it maliciously. And we on the defense adapt to that and change our approach. And we're seeing the exact same thing where these techniques are being applied to cybercrime. They're doing their homework. They're finding those gaps, particularly gaps in the handoff between the processes, right? So if you have one team to another team and there's a transfer of information, there's quite often a gap of security there. And those types of gaps are being exploited. And that's not just a cybersecurity gap. It could be an operational security gap or a physical security gap. So it's that kind of siloed approach to defense is what's breaking down, I think.
I appreciate that perspective. Joe, you have anything to add?
No, it's a good segue into what we talk about when you come back. But
Yep.
It's really about the bad actors are working together to get smarter, and they're comparing the notes. And they run it as a business. And we have to do the same thing on the industry side. We have to work together. We have to compare notes, and we have to take this as if it's an attack on all.
Agreed, 100%. All right, we're going to take about a minute and a half break. We'll be back. We'll look at the freightfraudhub.com, Freight Fraud Prevention Hub, chat through what resources are there, how you use the website, what its intention is for. But we'll see you all back in about a minute and a half.
Thanks, Nate.
If your fleet's downtime looks like chaos, you're missing out on GLCS. In the time-critical world of trucking and logistics, every minute counts. Meet GLCS, your expert partner in managed IT and technology services. We integrate seamlessly with your team, bringing seasoned IT professionals with deep trucking and logistics expertise. Imagine your software updates running smoothly, complex issues resolved quickly, and operations humming with efficiency. GLCS has your back. Our support doesn't just fix problems, it prevents them with our industry connections and proactive approach. We keep your trucks rolling and your brokers working. Think of us as the added resource your company needs to unleash its full potential. Visit glcs.net today and keep your business driving forward. GLCS, where efficiency meets expertise.
And we are back. So I'm going to share the website here on Freight Fraud Prevention Hub. So this is run by the NMFTA, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So you guys spun it up. There's a number of partners that are on it. I see, you got Fraud Girl. So there you go. Danielle Spinelli, she's been on the show a bunch of times. And I think we're on there now too. So tell me about the website and what its intentions for, where you're going with it. Kind of give an overview if you can.
Yeah, I'll start out and Ben, hand it off to you. But what it started out is we were looking at a product that we developed as part of SCAC, and it was a SCAC verification of non-Class 8 drivers. And as we started to do so, and as we've peeled this onion within the freight fraud, we find out how complicated, how complex it is. But then also it's an industry, as I mentioned before, really asking for help. And so what the Freight Fraud Prevention Hub is it's a place to get together and talk about freight fraud for those impacted or those that can assist freight fraud. And so, we've been reaching out to carriers, brokers, and then technology folks that really care about freight fraud. And we've been saying, hey, what are some of the things you've learned? What are your guides? How do you vet the carriers? And so those stories are on there. And this is kind of step one. Step two will be meetings, get-togethers, and discussions. But really, step one is getting people to put some documentation out there that really helps them so that, if you're impacted by freight fraud, you can go to this and say, okay, here's a guidebook. Okay, here's how so-and-so vets a carrier. And then for NMFTA, we want to put our guidebooks out there because, as I mentioned right before the break, we've got to do as an industry a better job sharing and communicating. This isn't something where we compete against. This is just something that we have to do. There's not for the folks that sponsor this, it's free. We don't charge for it. We just ask them to contribute. And then we're going to launch what's called NMFTA Threat Portal. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because when you are impacted by a cyber event or freight fraud, you can enter it. And the folks that sign up for updates and that commit to giving updates will also receive okay, this has just happened. And then the other thing that will happen is in the background, NMFTA will go through the data and try to find the patterns. For example, somebody was talking about, hey, I'm getting about $15,000 worth of tires stolen. This is how they're doing it. And if I would have known that from the beginning, if somebody would have warned me, I could have stopped it and it not had gone on for 6 months. And then at the end, the person was like, what makes me sad is I know the bad actor is moving on to the next victim. And so that's really what the concern is. So Freight Fraud Prevention Hub's really a gathering of people, a gathering of data to get that information. Ben?
Yeah, and it's from the cybersecurity angle. We've had a lot of resources that have gone out over the past couple of years that are related to cyber-enabled cargo crime, specifically from the cybersecurity team here. And they were always with all of our cybersecurity guidance, but not everyone who's involved in combating freight fraud or dealing with cargo crime and loss prevention at a fleet or at a broker is going to be looking for cybersecurity information to combat that. And so by bringing those resources in to the Freight Fraud Prevention Hub and kind of making that education location for everyone where we can talk about the different techniques that are used, but then also offer those resources and say, this is how cybersecurity controls directly impact your exposure to freight fraud or cargo crimes, and provide those resources in a single location is really exciting from our perspective.
Well, the only way we've gotten to where we are today, and we've gotten better numbers, is by talking about it. And as Joe and you've alluded to, the more we definitely know that Joe, we've lost looking at his beautiful face. So, but we can hear you just fine, Joe. So maybe it'll come back on, maybe it won't. So, talking about it, right, and communicating, and that's one thing this industry does very well when they want to. I mean, we are probably the best communicators there are. So you go back to the days of the CB and how we use social media and everything like that. So having a common receptacle here for good actors to start working in, I think is great. So I sort of scrolled through everything as Joe was talking for the most part. Certainly the SCAT verification is there. There's also, digital API standards. There's fraud related content. And this is going to build out as more people provide information to you. And as you continue as the NMFTA continues to develop the information themselves. So this is just one more tool in the tool belt for everyone to use. But I mean, ultimately, if you're a small carrier, small broker, someone that does not have resources to have, a cyber team on staff or at their beck and call, you can use this to establish your program and start it off. You have done, Ben, you've done some larger discussions on this at conferences and whatnot about how to kind of really set up a program, if I recall. Am I correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And then you're putting on, I think there's one cyber summit in the fall. Is there other events that you guys are putting together related to this?
Well, we do a monthly webinar on the cybersecurity team. So there's content about fraud prevention. There's content about cybersecurity awareness, and whether it's AI security or social engineering awareness or kind of the landscape. We do our annual trends report, and so we kind of unpack that over a period of webinars early in the year. And then we obviously have the fall conference that's out in Long Beach this year, September 29th through October 2nd. So we have the, both technical people and enterprise side, like penetration testers and hardware security folks and incident response, and we deal with cargo crime. So there's a really good conversational couple of days of content there. But all of the resources we have as well, we're constantly putting out blogs and articles and research papers and things on our website as well.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is we also have a quarterly meeting with CIOs, CTOs, COOs that we've been having now for about a year, and we really let them drive the conversation, and that helps us develop. Okay, what should we prioritize? But a lot of it's been freight fraud, and then we'll take some of that information and have meetings with law enforcement. And again, also we did a trip to DC where we went to talk cyber at a meeting with some of the folks at the White House, and they did not want to talk pure cyber. They wanted to talk cyber-enabled cargo theft. And so, a lot of the things that we do, like the CIO, the CTO meeting, is gathering information so that we can represent the industry well in meetings like that or meetings with FMCSA.
Oh, that's great to hear. Well, I mean, cyber itself is actually a massive, massive industry. So I don't that number is astronomical. Something like $12 trillion a year is related to cybercrime, or 12.6 or whatever it is. So it's a huge number. It's like the third largest GDP, but it's so big you can't tackle it as one effort, right? So this is a component of that, and it's one that certainly impacts just our industry. And as you said, Joe, one stolen load that doesn't fall under insurance for some reason could be the end of a 1, 10, 20 truck fleet. It depends. I mean, we're coming out of some tough times. The war chest is not full, and it can be a huge issue. So minor changes to your operation can prevent these things. So we've done internal training on, of course, we're not moving freight, but we've done internal training on cyber. It happens every month. It's certainly changed. We've done it for years and years now. When we first implemented it, it took about 6 months, and now everyone is, talking about all the amount of attacks that we most, and you get everyone from the entire organization here is well aware of what can happen and how it can come about. Where would you say the most dangerous operational gap is now for a carrier? So by operational gap, any sort of their process, what do you see is so if I was going to focus on one particular thing, I'm a carrier today. If I was going to focus on one thing, what should they focus on?
Joe, I'll jump in on this one and then toss it over to you. But I think that we spoke a little bit about it earlier, but processes and process controls, kind of a checks and balances system, so that exceptions to any process requires another verification, whether that's a technical verification or a human level verification. I go to Nate and I say, hey, does this look legitimate? Do you agree that we should make this change? That's a form of control over a process. But I think that we really, because a lot of these, you mentioned this, Nate, that a lot of these attacks involve human error. And in fact, the majority of these attacks involve some level of human error. And human error occurs when we deviate from a process or when we have a gap in our process. So really stepping back and examining, what are your processes internally? What technical controls do you have around them? And what operational controls do you have around them? And then how well are you adhering to them? And if there's deviations, can you audit those? Can you go back retroactively and say, okay, this was a process deviation. This is what happened. Here's the lessons learned, and here's how we're going to now update our process to account for that. I think that process, that step of reviewing your processes and adhering to them can really raise the bar for your organization. And I just want to add really quickly, Nate, you were talking about the training internally that you do. And I just want to call out that, a lot of times drivers are going to be your first set of eyes on something strange that's happening. Maybe they get a call from a broker, to change a destination, or something doesn't look right at the delivery or pickup. I think it's important to make sure that they are included in your cyber awareness training. which is often not done, unfortunately, because they don't touch technical resources in the same way as office employees do. But when it comes to cyber-enabled cargo crime, they're almost your best early warning device in some ways. So I just wanted to highlight that.
In a lot of ways, they're the last line of defense too. If you have, I mean, they can make that call saying something's weird before they pick up the load, after they pick up the load, whatever the case is. But if they're trained on it, they can understand that. In a perfect world, if we could submit, obviously they'll figure out a way to make this a problem. But if you could have a shipper verifying the driver and the truck, and the carrier and the broker were sharing information as well, that would close a lot of these gaps until someone figures out how to spoof that. But which it probably is already being done in some instances. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, it's a big enough issue in the industry that the drivers need to be trained about it. It's certainly talked about on Road Dog, so drivers have access to listen to Road Dog, and it's a topic that comes up every day. So I think they're aware of it. The more tools you give them, the more training you give them, the stronger they're going to be able to identify issues. So I always look at things people, process, technology, and that is a hierarchy, right? Great people, great technology, or great people, great processes, horrible technology, you're going to have problems, but you're still going to operate. Horrible people, great processes, great technology, you're probably going to function, but you're not going to be great. Horrible people, horrible processes, great technology, you're in trouble. So, it all comes down to that process hierarchy and the people that you have. You have great people, no processes, you're going to have some problems. So we talked about the dangerous operational gaps. Do you see a process that typically gets exploited more often than another process?
Well, that's hard to nail down. Like, what is the top offender here as far as processes that get exploited? But I think that the carrier vetting process, from a if you put on the broker hat for a minute and you think about carrier vetting, when do we see the most breakdowns in the process of vetting a new carrier? Well, it's going to be high pressure situation, load's got to get covered. It's probably Friday at 8 p.m. and everybody's trying to go home, right? And that every time that's where that process is going to break down. It's also, if you're not considering reviewing the carrier's digital footprint, do they have a domain? Do they have business email? How long have they been around? Does all of their information match up online? Does it match in the FMCSA base and all of that stuff? That can be a huge gap. That can be a major gap in the operation that is regularly exploited.
And to add to that, I think it's not just when you bring them on. The bad actors have gotten smart, right? Sometimes they'll carry a couple loads and they'll know the playbook of the broker or of the shipper. They'll be like, okay, I got to carry X amount of loads before I get a high value load. And that's really what they're targeting, is that high value load. And so I think it's just not vetting them in the beginning, but it's also making sure you're looking at your processes and what additional vetting needs to take place before they take a high value load. And we've heard about, some tricks that folks do in the industry. That's great, but I think it needs to be more part of the operations. Okay, I'm going to transition this driver to a high value load. What do I have to do? What's the additional vetting process? Because all of a sudden they're going from carrying something that you may be able to cover that's not, or that is not as big of a target to. All right, now they're carrying energy drinks or alcohol or tobacco or something that is a hot commodity on the black market. So it's not just the initial, but it's the follow-up too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great point, Joe.
Absolutely great point. And, I talked about it earlier, how it's cyber or freight fraud isn't just a technical issue. It sits in operations. It sits in compliance. It sits in a lot of other places now that it's actually less. It's certainly technical, but if the people don't follow the processes that the technical people are bringing forward, you're in trouble. So you mentioned timing, Joe. So sometimes vetting the carrier even after you've established them. We had a cyber incident where someone had compromised email, and they sat on a salesperson's email until there was a transaction that made a ton of sense. And then they took the information off that transaction and exploited it. And they will sit and wait until the time is perfect, whether it's freight, whether it's your account information. Who knows what they're going to mine for, but AI actually gives them the ability to mine that data a lot faster, with a lot more intent than manually the processes in the past. So, or even the automated process of the past that weren't that smart. Now they're able to pounce on every possible exploitation. So,
Yep.
So how do tools look? I mean, we've kind of laid, how the industry is struggling here. How do tools look for everyone coming in the future? So do you have any insight into kind of what we're doing from a cutting edge standpoint and how folks should pursue that?
I think there's a big focus on anomaly detection, right? So behavioral changes. That's one thing that AI is very good at is scanning vast volumes of data and picking out patterns, and then picking out deviations from those patterns. And so I think there's going to be a focus around monitoring the transactional behavior and establishing baselines, and then highlighting potential deviations in a way that may be subtle enough that we aren't going to catch them right away as humans because of the scale of the pattern recognition. I think you're going to see a lot more use of those kinds of technologies coming down the pipe.
And I think there's two things also, and one's maybe wishful thinking, but the other I'm hopefully we see both. But one is a willingness to invest financially, right? It's a lot of times it's like you said, margins are thin. Is this something that's really needed? We haven't been impacted. Then you are impacted and it's too late. Right. It's like when you do your budgeting process, this needs to be seen as a must have. This can't be seen as a nice to have or a luxury or, well, we'll wait till something happens. Right. This needs to be something that you have to do. You have to invest in it, whether it's through training or the tools or what have you. I know for us, I cringe every time we get the bill, but cybersecurity is something we have to pay for, whether it be things like pen testing or whether it be things like monitoring. Ben and I just spent a few hours this week looking at something that just didn't look right. And you've got to do that. And then I think the other thing I know I've mentioned a few times is you've got to be willing to communicate on it to learn from each other. We were in a CIO CTO call with the NMFTA threat portal, and somebody kind of tongue in cheek said, well, I want the data, but I don't want to submit the data, even though it's anonymous. And I kind of chuckled. I was like, you can't play that game.
Yeah.
And the first word you hear is, well, legal. And I get it. Right. But at some point we have to put that aside and be willing to communicate to help one another. And also the vendors, right? All the vendors on Freight Fraud Prevention Hub, kudos to you guys. But, we can't see this as a competition, right? Like for us, we're not selling a product. Right. We just want to help and educate. So I think the other thing is just really communicating, be willing to work together and budget for it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know, one thing I'm going to call out real quick here is API security. A lot of companies are looking at new AI solutions. A lot of companies are doing vibe coding, and API security is imperative. And if you just vibe code something, or if you have a solution that's coming up, some of the first questions you need to ask on these new solutions is what's their security protocols. What are they doing? How are they adjusting for that? and how are they staying on top of it? It's one thing that we vet every partner of ours now. The first we get hit, by multiple solutions a day almost, and the first questions that we now ask, we open with security. A lot of people are just ignoring it when they're building out their products. You get an ops guy who's like, "Hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to go to Uncle Claude and build it out," and then now you have a product. The product's great, but it's wide open. So, so if the next fraud event is happening somewhere, if I'm at that organization, what do you tip? I mean, this is kind of a good last question, I think. So if someone has a fraud event happening at their organization, typically they're not going to know about it. But what's the warning signs that you can look for initially on what's probably happening, or what is a company typically ignoring? We talked process, we talked other things, but I'm trying to zone in on those kind of major things that it's already happened. What do we do kind of midstream? We talked about the first part of it. What do we do kind of midstream to monitor and watch and prepare people to defend?
I think that the constant vetting, verification, is going to be your best detection, because if you think of the verification process as a pipeline where you have the very beginning, you've got the door to get in is your verification, and then once you're in, if it's an open hallway, you're not going to pick up necessarily that something's bad is happening until the very end when the fraud has occurred, and then it's too late. Now you're in damage control, and so I think it's looking at I know we talked about processes, but it's really more zeroing in on where in those processes have you built in tripwires? Where in those processes have you built in controls that will trigger some sort of an alert, that will trigger a warning that a deviation has happened, that something out of the ordinary has happened? Because if you have your verification and you have your process that you're following, but you don't have intermittent verification throughout that process, you're not going to catch something that passed the first check. So it's really about layering your defenses throughout your entire process, I think is the best thing that you can do to really boost the security of that transaction. I guess I would leave it there.
Perfect. That was, for the most part, the answer I was looking for. Almost every one today, Ben. I've dropped the line in the water and you bit every one. So sometimes it takes me a little bit to get the question out quite right, but it worked out. So Ben, Joe, I appreciate you guys coming on today. Where can people find you? Well, I guess first question is, anything else that we left that needs to be discussed today or talked about?
No, I think this covered it well. Really appreciate the time and giving this more visibility. That's really what we want to do. So appreciate that.
We're always here for that. Where can people find you guys if they want to reach out?
You can find us. Oops, sorry.
No, go ahead.
nmfta.org. If you go on our website, there's lots of great information. There's a link to cyber. There's also a link to both Ben and I where you can reach out to us, and you can also reach out to us via LinkedIn. We have a cyber section within LinkedIn, a cyber page that we're always looking at and monitoring, and our personal LinkedIn's also. Ben?
Yep, and I would add to that, there's also cyber@nmfta.org. You can drop an email to the team here. We'll get back to you if you've got questions or are looking for resources. We can point you in the right direction.
Perfect. Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on. It's always great chatting with you, and hopefully see you sooner than later.
Thanks
Nate. For having us.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Freight fraud is not just a stolen load problem anymore. It's a trust problem. It's an identity problem, and it's a workflow problem. And whether we want to admit it or not, it's now an operational problem that touches every part of this industry. The next freight fraud event may not start with someone cutting a seal or driving away with a trailer. It most likely will start with one email, one login, one phone call, one rush decision, or one process that nobody questioned because it's always worked that way. This is the part that we have to take seriously. Criminals are studying our habits. They're studying our systems. They're studying how fast we move, how much pressure our people are under, and where we are most likely to trust instead of verify. So the challenge coming out of this conversation is simple. Look at your business differently. Look at your carrier onboarding. Look at your email security. Look at your dispatch processes. Look at how delivery changes are handled, and look at who has access to your systems. Whether your people feel empowered to stop the line when someone feels wrong or something feels wrong. Because prevention does not start after the load is gone. It starts before it starts moving. As Ben mentioned a few moments ago, when you're midstream, you're probably not going to catch it. Huge thanks to Ben Wilkens and Joe Orr from the NMFTA for joining us and bringing us real insight into one of the biggest threats facing freight today. And I made it through the episode without slurring too much, so I'm happy about that. So stay curious, stay informed, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Until next time, drive forward with purpose and innovation. Thanks for watching.